Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Boruto Anime episode review. This one's going to be for episode 31, which is called Boruto and Kagura. And this more or less acted as the finale to this Land of Water kind of arc that we have going on here, Hidden Mist Village arc. And I thought it was actually really good. It was more of an action-centric episode, though I suppose it kind of did have some good character moments for Kagura, for Boruto. Was it the most ideal ending to the arc after it actually, I suppose, developed into something pretty kind of big and meaningful? Perhaps not, in that I think the Kagura stuff, very, very quickly turned around. There wasn't perhaps as, big or emotional of a, realization from Kagura as I expected. I'm maybe hoping at the start of the next episode we'll have some maybe better clarification on that, or they'll bring him back at a later point and he'll kind of be a much more developed character. As it was more of just, Boruto believes in me. Shizuma is kind of pointed out that, he's basically actually guilty of a lot of the things he's accusing, Chojuro of. And he is the kind of true villain and has been manipulating him this entire time, and that he doesn't have to just kind of be, the exact same as the people he's being compared to in the same way that Boruto doesn't have to be compared to Naruto, Kagura doesn't have to be compared to Yagura. So it was nice, and the way they did the fights I thought was actually really well done. How they kind of morphed the fight from one fight into another one, and then kind of brought in different characters to go on, and how they did the kind of team ups and stuff like that in the end. For the most part it was basically just everyone against Shizuma, but because Kagura was kind of doubting for lots of the fight, it was primarily Boruto Kagura initially. And I did actually I think the one bit in terms of this dynamic that I liked was that Boruto kind of basically said, I could never lose to you the way you are now. And they basically just had Boruto actually be better than Kagura as he is at this point, able to, without I suppose getting a full-on fight victory, he had the advantage in the fight because Kagura was so conflicted. I suppose Boruto was much clearer in his kind of goals. So I definitely like that a lot, how they kind of just had Boruto get the advantage, and then you switch kind of Shizuma in, and you have Boruto admit that, I'm not stronger than you, but I'll still win in one kind of swoop. And they have Mitsuki come in to back him up, and they do the whole thing with Shizuma and obviously the Samehada reveal, and eventually getting to the whole morphing with Samehada, though mainly because he's inexperienced, so it kind of takes over him. That was a cool use of what is, as Chojuro explains, the most difficult to control sword, because it's kind of alive, whereas the other ones are just kind of weapons with powers and they drain your power. This one is alive, and if you don't control it, it will control you. That's how kind of crazy it is. Pretty cool design, I thought, that, when the sword took over him, it basically turned him much more shark-like, emphasis kind of on the arm where it kind of took over him, and then the kind of final blow more or less kind of cut Samehada off his arm, so it kind of kept Shizuma alive. They didn't kill him, because I suppose with him as a villain, they kind of, as much as they basically reveal that he did a lot of bad stuff, they are basically still, I think, trying to make it out that this is a kid who took things too far. He's still just a teenager. He had these kind of ideas, and he still has the opportunity to change and realize how wrong he was. So I'm not really sure if we'll ever come back to him, but clearly something will be done with him, in that it didn't really feel like they killed him off or anything like that. So there's always the opportunity to do something there with him. I like that when it really came down to the final bit of the fight, Chojuro was going to take up the sword himself from Kagura and fight, but Kagura said, I'll do it. Boruto backed him up. They split the sword in two and did the kind of final blow with the Chojuro's sword. And I like that they kind of chose this as the moment to have Boruto's eye power return to kind of power up the two of them. to get the advantage over kind of Samehada, who'd gone out of control. That was pretty cool, just as a little reveal. It didn't seem like anyone really noticed it because it just kind of flickered on for a second. But I like that they showed that it is a thing that is present outside of just the first kind of arc that we had. But, you know, it seems to be this thing where, like, when Boruto pushes himself to the limit, this thing will activate, and I assume they'll eventually reveal that he'll have to learn how to control it so he can activate it at will. But, you know, we'll see where they go from there. Mitsuki was interesting. The reveal of the scroll was just that it was kind of proof that Shizuma was doing this, basically the stuff he was accusing Shojuro of like, no, Shizuma's been the one taking out people who disagreed with him and performing assassinations behind the scenes and plotting stuff, whereas that is not what Shojuro has been doing. They kind of jumped past perhaps the point of like, yeah, the villainous characters from the Mist are just kind of like lost to history in a way and just kind of full on treated as like they never existed in a way, which I thought was an interesting dynamic to play up, like part of the reason why he is the way he is. But they didn't really bring up the whole idea of like Kisame doesn't seem to be like a part of the history of the village or anything like that. But there's still opportunity to do something eventually. Maybe it wasn't as big of a point in the end as we really thought it would be. Other things that stood out to me. One, Mitsuki, I think, clearly limited himself, I think, in the fight, in that they were setting him up that like he's going to be really amazing, and I think to a degree he was in the fight, and it just so happened that they were up against, you know, the sword that kind of absorbs chakra, so it was a bit of a disadvantage for like anyone going up against it. But it's clear that there's much more to come from Mitsuki here, and he was sort of taken by surprise on a few occasions, but I think there is a lot that we're not being told about Mitsuki. Obviously, I know, having read most of the manga stuff, that there is something more, but was he just keeping it a secret? Could he not have activated that? Does Mitsuki still have to learn how to control some of his more kind of deep kind of hidden powers? We'll have to see, but I think what really impressed me the most was just Boruto in general. How amazing he was throughout the fight, just constantly able to kind of get back up, do the shadow clones, do wind style, which he only learned basically in the last few episodes over the course of this arc, and perfecting the Boruto stream attack, which is revealed here to be when he makes his clones and like two of them throw the other two, like the clone and the real one, using wind style to accelerate them, and then the last clone accelerates the real one even faster, and they deliver this like crazy like triple boosted wind style attack that perhaps was assisted by a bit of like a gentle kind of fist kind of action maybe at the end, and how Boruto delivered the final blow. Thought it was maybe going to be some sort of a crazy headbutt attack, but they had Boruto obviously put the hand out at the last second, but still pretty devastating kind of final blow on Shizuma before he did the big Samehada kind of switch and Samehada taking over him. I think in a way what this episode does is it really makes the movie, if they're really sticking with the movie as being like the main canon idea for the events of those episodes, it makes Boruto in the movie feel really, really weak, or else they just didn't showcase certain aspects of who he was. And it's either going to have to be a case where I think the anime is going to have to more or less do its own adaptation of the movie with this kind of more like updated, nuanced version of Boruto, where he's better than maybe the movie initially presented it, but everyone else is just on an even bigger level, so Boruto still has to do what he does in the movie. Or else they just do something just prior to that starting to really put Boruto in a position where he would be kind of doubting himself that much. Because what they've done, I think, in the show, the anime, has been really good for Boruto, but it also runs a little counter to what actually happens in the movie, in that the movie is meant to, I think, feel like this is the big turning point for Boruto, where he goes from being the character that he is in the movie to being who he is afterwards. But as it is right now, like the Boruto where we have in the manga right now, which is post-movie, feels more like the Boruto in the anime right now, and neither of those characters feel like the one from the movie. So I really feel that they probably will have to do a pretty good adaptation in the anime of the movie, and then that will be the overall kind of canon thing, and then the Boruto movie will probably just end up being this thing that kind of like this really high quality movie that just kind of started the whole Boruto thing, but isn't the most like heavy canon thing overall. In that, I think over time we've learned little bits and pieces about what was kind of cut out of the movie and maybe what they'd add in, and the anime obviously having a lot of time to add in other stuff. Like, we want to see all these characters who we've only been introduced to in the anime and see what the other teams were like in the village and how they did during the exams and so on. But there's still a little bit of time before we get to there. We still have to have the full formation of all the teams, because Sarada, Boruto, and Mitsuki aren't a team just yet, but this arc in a way set it up that like that kind of is how it will be, in that Mitsuki and Boruto obviously work perfectly well as a team here. Their 2-on-1 action here was great, and then Sarada had her own one-on-one fight and was pretty good. So the three of these as like your main team is very much being set up quite well. But yeah, that's more or less it. I think it's overall been a pretty successful arc. I assume that, as I said, there'll be some form of wrap-up at the start of the next episode before we get into the whole Himawari, Boruto forgetting about the souvenir thing, and whatever they do there. I'm excited for our Himawari episode, of course, because everyone wants to know more about her. But I hope they don't just forget that there's still a little bit to do with this arc, which actually turned out to be a lot better than maybe expected. I think we still need a little bit more with Kagura. Obviously, we have to wrap up the fact that there's a field trip going on. There's a lot of other characters here in the village beyond just Boruto and Sarada and Mitsuki. We obviously have to have them returning home, and maybe some sort of a wrap up with whatever's going to happen with Shizuma. Kagura, in terms of like what position is he exactly is he in now? Like, Chodoro obviously is going to be the Mizukage for a while, but Kagura, is he going to be like Chodoro's like assistant going forward, and he'll use the sword a lot more than Chodoro will, or what? So there's still that stuff to do, but in general, like most of the arc being over, I thought it was it was overall, I think, pretty good in terms of like, for sure it was, I think, in the end a little bit more like bigger of a plot than I expected, but they still kept it small in that they obviously had the plot point of like, we'll get around this being an international incident by basically saying it's just a fight on a school trip. It's just kids fighting. That's how we'll stop this becoming this huge like international incident between the Leaf Village and the Mist Village. We'll just say it's just a scuffle basically, and that's what kept this arc being small. Whereas, like, I suppose we're meant to be in kind of like an era of peace, and it's really the Otsutsuki attack in the movie that kind of kicks everything off again in a way. But yeah, that's my thoughts on episode 31 of the Boruto anime. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the episode, as well as what I had to say about it. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.